Good evening. This is Michael Wong. I'm the Vice President of the San Francisco chapter of Veterans for Peace, and I also serve on the National Board of Veterans for Peace. Today I'm joined by George Koo. George is retired from a global advisory services firm where he advised clients on their China strategies and business operations. He's educated at MIT, the Stevens Institute, and Santa Clara University, and he's the founder and former managing director of International Strategic Alliances. George, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Nice to be back.
Great. Well, our subject today is the question of whether or not the United States is on a path of our own self-destruction. Can you tell our audience a little bit about your thoughts on that? Do you think we're on a path of self-destruction, and if so, why?
Okay, I really do think that where we're heading right now is heading towards the cliff of self-destruction for two major reasons. One is that we're not tending our own domestic priorities. We're not dealing with all the problems we have at home. And secondly, we are losing prestige on the international arena. And because of all the international policy, which I will go into, we are actually weaponizing the dollar, and we are self-inflicting the credibility of the dollar. And that when that comes home to roost, we are in deep, deep trouble. And that's the two reasons why I think that the American public, if they don't do anything about this, as a country, we're heading to destruction.
Okay, so it sounds like our foreign policies, that our priorities are upside down and we're not taking care of our domestic challenges. What do you think should be our highest priority? Should we prioritize our domestic challenges, or you think we should prioritize our foreign policy? What's your take on that?
Okay. Well, I mean, absolutely, the top priority that we need to have is to deal with all the domestic issues and problems that we have that we've been ignoring. Now, President Biden say he has a plan, Build Back Better, and Anti-Inflation Act, and so on and so forth. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll find that very little has accomplished to reverse the problems that we don't solve these. Like I said, that we're in trouble. So let me mention a few problems we have. Some of the obvious ones are infrastructure. Our bridges are in deep need of repair. We need to keep our railroad not only safer, so we don't have too many running off the rail, but we also need to get our capability up to create a high-speed rail system. We need to fix our highways. The highways are getting very old since it's built in the 50s. And furthermore, we're way behind in infrastructure. We don't even have 5G infrastructure, whereas many other parts of the world, thanks to Chinese company Huawei, has 5G way ahead of ourselves. So these are some of the problems. But I think the most important problem, actually, that the American public and our political leaders are not thinking about and is not aware of or doing something is the development of our human capital. What I mean by development of human capital is that we need to have our kids growing up with quality education, stimulated and make them qualify to take on high technology jobs and occupations. And we can't do that if they don't get a quality K through 12 education that will enable them to apply and attend some of the best schools in the United States. If you go back a step further, we need to pay attention to proper nutrition for our kids, because when they're from infancy and on to, say, kindergarten, those are probably the most critical, or ensure them to develop their brain properly, their mental capacity properly, and better prepare them for school. And of course, we have to have quality schools waiting for them. And this is an area that is so, the gap is so amazing, because we talk about competing with China, and yet the Chinese are having a increasingly better school system for their kids. Their kids are getting proper nutrition, they're getting better schooling, and they're generating 7, 8 times more uh, STEM graduates, science, technology, engineering, math graduates than we are. This is a disaster, in my opinion, that we're not doing anything about, and we urgently need to take care of, and that's our domestic problems. Our focus is not here, not in we need to change that.
Yes, we're, as you say, we're neglecting our domestic problems, and we've been going around the world trying to dictate to other countries how they should run their country. You know, we've been bombing other countries, invading other countries, sanctioning country after country. And as a result, our latest sanctions on Russia, for example, because of the Ukraine war, the majority of countries, especially in the global south, as well as the Middle East and, you know, China, India, they're not going along with our sanctions. And what we're doing is essentially isolating ourselves. And by threatening other countries around the world, whether they're capitalist or communist, or whether they're democratic or dictatorships, regardless, we've been doing it to so many countries that we've actually isolated ourselves.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
The most serious consequence, Michael, is when we confiscated the Russian assets, and we took over their assets, and were even taking the interest payments of their assets earned, and giving it to the Ukrainians to supply Ukraine's with more weapons. This is what we call weaponizing the dollar. And by weaponizing the dollar, Biden has basically announced to the world that we can do this. We did this for Russia. We can do this to anyone we want if you don't behave according to what we want. And if any day we can take away your assets. And what this is doing is scaring the heck out of the other countries, especially the global south, so that they are now consciously, deliberately trying to get rid of holding on to dollars. They don't want to hold on to dollars if they absolutely have to, unless they absolutely have to. So already you can see that the reserve U.S. dollar as a reserve currency is falling to close from 70-some% to close to 50%, and continue to drop. That's one situation. We see that the Saudi Arabia has let the petrodollar agreement lapse. The petrodollar was something that Kissinger had negotiated in the 50s, asking his deal with Saudi was that if you sell your oil for only for dollars, we will guarantee your security. We will protect you militarily. And that agreement has lapsed. Knew it. Why? Because the U.S. shaky because everybody's beginning to realize the U.S. can change their mind anytime that's not in their interest to honor their agreement. So that's not worth anything. And then secondly, Saudi would not want to be stuck with only with dollars. They want to be able to negotiate and sell their oil over a spectrum of currencies. And indeed, they are selling oil for the Chinese renminbi, for example, and selling a lot of it that way. So my concern, my observation is that when we deliberately threaten others by threatening to take their dollar reserve from them, we are eroding our own credibility. And after all, our dollar is only backed by, quote, full faith and credit of the federal government. And what is that? That's the printing press. We guarantee to print more dollars when we need it. What does that do? That creates inflation because there's more and more dollars floating around, especially if other countries no longer wants to hold on to dollars. Then we are going to be stuck with all the dollars. And what will that do? That will create inflation. What will inflation do? That will destroy our economy. So that's the second concern I have, is that our domestic policy is not have zero implementation. Our international policy is not making friends, but making adversaries and creating distrust in our word, in our military power.
So the United States, as you say, has shaken the world's confidence in the reliability of America as a economic safe haven with ballooning federal debt and people being hesitant, more hesitant to hold the dollar as a reserve currency. What happens if the dollar is no longer the reserve currency of choice? And as we see, countries like China, India, and other countries around the world are starting to look at doing business in local currencies or national currencies other than the dollar. What happens if all this comes to a head and the dollar is no longer the reserve currency of choice?
Well, we don't know when that's going to be, Michael, because after all, if 50% of all the reserve currency is still in the dollar, it doesn't mean that it will go away tomorrow. But if you go, I mean, the value of the dollar since World War II days to today, believe it or not, the value of the dollar has depreciated by something like 96%. In other words, a dollar today is worth only 4 cents of what it was worth after World War II. That's how much the value of the dollar has decreased. And that explains why we used to be able to buy an ice cream cone for a nickel, $4 or $5 for an ice cream cone. That's this measure of the weakness of the dollar. The other part of course, is that there is this BRICS organization, which is BRICS consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Well, Saudi is now a member. Iran is a member. Malaysia and Thailand just became a member, and more are knocking on the door to join. And by the recent count, the expectation is that by the end of this year, there'll be more than close to 40 countries that will become members of BRICS. And one of the discussion that BRICS is having very seriously is to create an alternative currency that anybody and everybody can use for international trade independent of the dollar. And I don't have any idea as to what that currency is going to look like, but it's not going to be backed by the printing press. It will be backed by gold, perhaps, by some sort of blockchain digital currency. They're seriously talking about it. But in the meantime, countries like India and China and Russia, they are trading freely based on their own currency, independent of the dollar. So that's already happening. The other thing that's very concerning, should be very concerning to us Americans, is that the threat of the military power doesn't seem to be as mighty as it used to be. Most recently, USS Eisenhower, the aircraft carrier, was sailing through the Red Sea, and the Houthis sent bombs and successfully exploded explosives on the carrier. We don't know how much the damage was. Our official Pentagon report is that it was nothing. We didn't get hit. But on the other hand, USS Eisenhower got the hell out of there and backed away from where they were being hit. And just imagine the mightiest war machine, the USS carrier, can be defeated by these ragtag rebels in Yemen who sent, I guess, some sort of a firecracker that did damage. That's a erosion of the American prestige. The fact that we are unable to stop the genocide in Gaza and practically had to plead with Netanyahu to don't starve and kill the Palestinians, to show mercy, humanitarian mercy to other living people, that totally destroyed the credibility of the United States as far as the third world is concerned. I've already mentioned the fact that Saudi is detaching from the requirement of selling for petrodollars. Just a few days ago, Putin went to visit North Korea, and they signed a mutual assistance agreement, which basically, I don't remember the whole detail, but basically says if any country invade one, the other is obligated to come to the rescue to fight alongside the ally. So if South Korea were to invade North Korea, Russia will step in. If the United States and Japan invades North Korea, Russia will step in. By implication, if NATO invades Russia, North Korea would be obliged to join in the fight as well. So that's another show of skepticism, show of fear, the longer fear of the American mighty military. So what do we have left?
Well, so that raises a number of questions. First of all, North Korea has ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that
Yeah,
can hit the United States, including as far away as Washington, D.C.,
yeah,
with nuclear warheads. And recently, the intelligence community has discovered that they have a new rocket that is apparently given to them by the Russians, which is more accurate than the ICBMs that they previously had. So
yeah,
uh, between that and the new alliance between Russia and North Korea, it's become much more dangerous.
right. And
Uh,
even if Pentagon is not worried about what you just said, Michael, if I were Japan and if I were South Korea, I would be plenty worried because we're much too close. They're much closer to North Korea, and they'd be the first one to get hit.
yeah, and also, how does our policy with China come into this discussion? Because a
Yeah,
lot of what we're doing is trying to stop China's peaceful economic rise because we don't want an economic competitor. And starting with Obama, we've upped our military profile around surrounding China. We've moved 60% of our naval force there. We've been building up alliances. We even brought NATO in to do exercises around China, and we've had NATO say that China is some kind of existential threat to NATO, even though obviously China is not in the North Atlantic. Um,
yeah,
and we've just gave a communication system called Link 16 to Japan and South Korea and Taiwan and other forces in Asia that we plan to use against China. Australia comes to mind as well.
right.
And we've rebuilt bases in the Philippines to also fight against China. How does China come? How does our policy against China come into this whole discussion? And what are the dangers of this
Well,
policy?
yeah. I mean, you're raising a bunch of good points, Michael. It is very much part of our upside down priorities that I've been talking about. We deliberately, through a $300 million budget every year, create a mainstream media propaganda to blacken China, to demonize China, so that we can justify our military budget of 800 million a year or more to develop weapons. We need to have a common adversary to justify spending that kind of money. And China is selected and designated as that adversaries to justify our spending. But our spending is way inefficient because when the Pentagon spends $1,000 for a hammer or $100,000 for a field toilet, we, the American taxpayers, should be very, very unhappy. The only people that's happy is the hammer supplier or the field toilet maker. They're happy as a clam. They're part of the military industrial complex that's raking the dough. They're the ones that's interested in creating this tension. What does China do? What China has to develop, because they have always said that they will not be the first to launch a ICBM or to start a nuclear warfare, but they must maintain a credible second strike capability. In order to do that, they have to develop certain technologies that we don't even have yet, such as hypersonic missile. A hypersonic missile travels at 5 to 10 times faster the speed of sound. Basically, it's capable of hitting the target before the target even realizes and need to send out fire off the Patriot missile to try to knock it down. It's too late. Boom, you've been had already. the second point is when China develops these weapons, they don't spend $100 for a hammer or $1,000 for a hammer. They make the lowest cost products and weapons. And already, as I think I may have mentioned one time before, they have the largest navy, or they have more naval missiles in the United States. Why? Because their shipbuilding capability is about 50% of the world capacity. What do we have? What does the U.S. have as a shipbuilding capacity? Less than half a percent. If you do the math, the China shipbuilding capability is more than 100 times more than the U.S. And yet U.S. insists on spending money to taking on China as an adversary. Why? Why are we doing this? The Chinese side, they don't have military bases around the world like we do. We have 8, at last count, maybe 800, 900, up to 1,000. Chinese don't have any soldiers around the world. They have a few at Djibouti to support their patrol ships that are patrolling against the pirates off of Horn of Africa. Instead, China goes around the world and help third world countries with their infrastructure. They help build their infrastructure with ports, with rail, with highway. These countries' economy grows. As they grow, they have more things to trade with. China benefits because China is the leading trading country. They do business together. So the China's infrastructure assistance helps the country to become future business partners. That's how they work. They work with those countries to help them with their standard of living. They don't tell them how they should govern themselves. They don't tell them whether they should be a democracy or not a democracy. They're just trying to help everybody with a rising tide that raises all boats and have everybody enjoy a better, higher standard of living.
That's what China did going back thousands of years in ancient times with the ancient Silk Roads. It's exactly the same strategy. I was reading that going back as far as 4,000 years, there were artifacts that had been found in Africa, Black Africa,
Yeah.
that came originally from China and vice versa.
Right.
So China is basically following the same strategy that it's followed for, 4,000 years at a minimum. And that means that the geostrategic results are likely to be the same, which is that China's not going to dominate the world, but it will trade with the rest of the world, and it'll be mutually win-win for all of the countries involved because they're each developing themselves, trading with each other, and mutually benefiting and growing from the trade economically.
Yeah.
And
yeah. You mentioned.
Go ahead.
When you mentioned the artifacts off the coast of Africa, that didn't happen 4,000 years ago. That happened in the early 15th century when Admiral Zheng He had a huge flotilla that sailed around the South China Sea as far as Australia and as far as the east coast of Africa. He did that 7 different times. He didn't invade any of those countries, but he brought gifts. He also took on some of the royalties of those countries and brought them back to China to show them what the great country China is, and made friends on behalf of the Emperor of China. That's been the Chinese culture and history. You're right, for 4,000 years. Even way back in the 200 BC era, the first emperor of China sent an emissary with a few thousand young boys and girls, and the leader of that flotilla promised Qing Shi Huang, the emperor, that he will find a fountain of youth, the everlasting pill that will allow him to live forever. And of course, he never came back. He went to Japan and supposedly introduced the Chinese culture to the Japanese, who at that time didn't have a written language and didn't really have any system of government. But by Tang Dynasty, which is around 7th century AD, the Japanese, the Koreans, many of the scholars and students from around China, they all go to Xi'an because that's where the center of knowledge is. They go there to study, to learn, and they bring back what they've learned from China. The castles and the architecture in Kyoto, for example, is still faithful replica of the Tang Dynasty architecture. The Japanese kimono, sorry, is again, they learn it and copied it from the Tang Dynasty. That's what the Tang Dynasty women used to wear. China exerts their influence through their culture, through their frankly, sometimes the feeling of superiority, because they feel that they have the superior history and culture. They never felt the need to have to conquer anybody. And that's been their way of operation through 4,000 years.
Let me just switch a little bit to another aspect. What about Biden's drive to decouple and Biden's accusation of China's overcapacity?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that question very much reflects the U.S. path to self-destruction. And I'm going to explain it it's a very multifaceted question. So I'm going to try to explain it and cover it differently. When Trump started with the Trump war on imports from China, economists will tell you that is protectionism. It protects non-competing industries in the US, and the American taxpayer pays for it by having to pay more for the goods that's made in China. Over the long haul, let's talk about the electric vehicle as an example. By keeping the low-cost Chinese EVs from the US, it will keep the GM, Ford, other American car makers from not having to compete. Well, by not having to compete, they will lose their share in the world market. And eventually they will lose their market share in the US as well. Because there's no way that a superior product at a lower cost, you can keep them out forever. It's just not going to happen. The other irony is that if China can make an electric vehicle that is superbly made, easy to drive, and sells for $10,000, the Biden administration should welcome that import, because the poor, lower economic class of Americans can afford a $10,000 car, but may not, that a 100% tariff at $20,000, they may not be able to buy that car. but having an affordable car allows them to commute, to go to work, get a job, and help the economy. Furthermore, we're supposed to be battling climate change. We're supposed to be lowering CO2 emission. What's going to happen to that if we don't allow the efficient electric vehicle to come in from China? This is what I would call self-destruction, and it will hurt our own economy over the near term and over the long term. Another example, right now, China's electric vehicle battery technology is so far ahead of the West. The latest I hear, a maximum battery capacity for EV is about 600 miles on a single charge. I don't think we have any battery that can compete with that. Secondly, they have developed a fast charge technology so that you can get 80% of the charge in 10 minutes. 10 minutes is what it takes for you to go in to the gas station and get a cup of coffee and maybe buy a donut. Thirdly, which is really amazing, Huawei supposedly have developed a technology that will allow you to wirelessly charge your car battery while your car is moving. And it's not just one car at a time. They can charge multiple number of cars wirelessly at the same time. Now, why would we discourage the import of that kind of technology to the United States? If the benefit of that kind of technology, again, is going to help us battle climate change, reduce CO2 emission, all the benefits that we swore that we were going to do, and now just because it's coming from China, we're going to keep them out and not allow them to come in. This, I submit, is a path to self-destruction, and American people better start to wake up, because we are pointed in so many wrong direction and not helping ourselves to benefit for the future.
Those are good points, George. And the United States is spending huge amounts of money on propaganda to demonize countries around the world, whether we're talking about Venezuela, or whether we're talking about Iran, or whether we're talking about Russia or China, or whether we're talking about Nicaragua. And if we took all that money that we used to demonize other countries and all that propaganda that we produce and spent it on propaganda trying to get our people to value education and go to college and get a good education and get a high-paying professional job. And if we took even a small portion of the money we spend on our military and use it to develop our colleges and our universities so that people, for example, could get a free university education, as they do in many countries that we call dictatorships, we could certainly compete with any other country, including China. And we can't necessarily dominate the world or dominate China or dominate other countries, but we can certainly keep up. We can be a very prosperous country. We can be at peace with other countries. And we can share both best practices with other countries without having to be antagonistic or adversarial. And other countries can see what's good about us and copy what things they think are good from us. And we can do the same in terms of learning from them and copying best practices that we find that other countries have developed. It doesn't need to be an adversarial relationship.
Right.
And we could be a very prosperous, successful country.
Yeah. So let me offer 3 observations as a conclusion of our discussion tonight. One, our insistence on being the hegemon of the world is costing us a lot more than we can afford to pay, as we have already discussed tonight. Second point, tourism is coming back. China is opening up its country for tourists, and all kinds of, especially the younger people, are going into China to see for themselves. And some of them have gone to Xinjiang and elsewhere, and their video blog shows what they see, shows what they're learning, and concluding that the things that the West is saying has just been a pack of lies and false and fabrications. So all that $300 million a year budget that you mentioned is totally wasted. It's not worth, it's not worth what they printed on. And sorry, I was going to make a third point, but I forgot what it was. So why don't we leave it at this and call it a night?
Okay, yes, and thanks for mentioning Xinjiang. I know that there's a lot of propaganda about a genocide going on there, but in fact, that's been contradicted by UN reports, by Muslim countries that have sent delegations there, by the fact that there's several Muslim countries that border Xinjiang, and yet there's no huge influx of refugees into those countries. And there's over 200 million visitors to Xinjiang every year. And actually, I and some friends are planning to go there later this year. So yes, that's part of the propaganda that I think we should spend on education rather than outright lies about different countries, not just China. Okay, we'll end it here. Do you have any last?
I remember that third point, and I'll just mention it quickly.
Okay.
I think China is using more robots in their manufacturing process than anyone else in the world. They don't necessarily make the best robots, but they're making plenty of robots for manufacturing. The capability of making robots is going to be way exceed what they can use for themselves. So why are they doing this? They're planning to export their robots all over the world, all around the world, because that will help all the countries adopt the robots to raise their quality of product and lower the costs. And the reason I bring this up is because you, Michael, has said we need to raise the quality of education. And indeed, in order for robots to operate the jobs that you ordinarily or in the past would do it yourself, you need to have higher skills, and you need to be able to qualify to operate above the robotics in order to make a living. That's it.
Great. That's a great final comment, George. And I think that would be a perfect note for us to end the discussion tonight. We'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Thank you. Bye.